Again, thank you for being here this evening and taking time out for this important topic. I am Michelle Byrne, and I'm on the board of the Greenville chapter of League of Women Voters. And I'm also chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. My colleague, Laura Haight, is also here from the Greenville chapter, and she is chair of the Gender Equity. Thank you, Laura. And kind of brought this topic and said, we need to do something about this, get this out and learn more about it and do something about it. So we have two great speakers tonight that we're very pleased to share with you. First is Nichelle Harrison. Nichelle is a mother, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and self-described student of life for life. In her professional career, she's the director of Belonging for the Center for Courage and Renewal in an international nonprofit that exists to nurture deep integrity and relational trust. She's the owner of the MAP Agency, a venture that blends her personal mission to contribute to the advancement and empowerment of women with workforce solutions for South Carolina. I looked that up and to learn a little bit more about it. And it's a non-traditional workforce resource dedicated to helping qualified women relaunch professional careers with empowerment for a healthier, happier, and more productive path back to work. So that's Michelle. And then we also have the Honorable Chandra Dillard with us. Representative Dillard started her public service in 1999 as a member of the Greenville City Council, representing District 3, making her the first woman to serve the district. After a distinguished service record of 9 years on the City Council, Councilman Dillard ran for and was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives in 2008, representing State House District 23. In the House, she serves on the Ways and Means Committee. She has held leadership positions in both the House Democratic Caucus, South Carolina Legislative Black Caucus, and the South Carolina General Assembly Women's Caucus. She's a hands-on advocate for constituents, I being one of them, who believes in the spirit of collaboration to solve community and state challenges. Over the course of her public service, she secured millions of dollars to address human development, community development, affordable housing, and infrastructure needs. Chandra serves on a number of boards, one which is the Nicholtown Child and Family Collaborative, an organization she founded to empower parents with young children to create a sustainable infrastructure for family success. Chandra is also the Director of Community Relations for Furman University. She holds a bachelor's in the business administration from Winthrop College and a master's in public administration from Walden University. Additionally, she's a graduate of Leadership Greenville, Leadership South Carolina, and Furman's Riley Institute's Diversity Leaders Initiative. Thank you both for being here this evening. So Nichelle, we'll start off with you tonight. Can you just give us a little bit of a background on the issue and of pay inequity and what's this is all about?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. It's really good to be here. Really good to be with the League of Women Voters and Chandra. I feel, so honored to be able to sit here and have this conversation with you all. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Equal Pay Day as a whole, right? So Equal Pay Day really is just a day. It highlights the wage gap. And what I get the question all the time, what is the wage gap? So the wage gap is actually the difference in pay in men and women in the workforce. So just point blank, that's what the wage gap is. It has been persistent and it has been pervasive, for a very long time. We have made some strides. And if we look at numbers kind of overall, we see numbers will go up, since women have come into the workforce. But looking at those overall numbers doesn't really give us a clear picture of what's going on in the workforce. Again, this wage gap is something that's been around for a long time, and it's going to take a long time for us to get to a place of pay parity. So that's the wage gap overall. We know that tomorrow is Black Women's Equal Pay Day, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what that is. Because again, what I said looking at overall numbers, we can't really tell a difference, right? It looks like we're making progress in the workforce, and we are. I don't want to take anything from women because we definitely are making a lot of progress. But when we look at those numbers broken down, it tells a really different story. So Black women's equal pay day is the approximate day a Black woman must work into the next year to receive the same amount of pay as her white non-Hispanic coworker. And I like to kind of slow down and say that so that we can take it in. It's the number of days or months that women must work into the next year. So last year, that day was in August. This year is in September. And what that date change means is that Black women have to work an entire 9 months after a year to reach pay parity with her coworker. So, and again, the number last year was 63 cents. This year is 58 cents to the dollar. So if we look at that, we're actually moving backwards. So if we look at what that means, and we have a chart, I think, where we can look at how it's really broken down, and we can look at the numbers and we see where women stand on this. So women's equal pay day was in March. So overall, that move, that was a positive move for us. Underneath that, we have Asian women. Moms is a new category that's been added. Then we have Black women, Indigenous women, and Latina women. And these are all, we can see how the pay rate goes down. And that means a lot. Historically, the wage gap has always been present. You know, there's never been a time in this country when it has not existed along the lines of race and gender. It's been kind of had a stubborn resilience, I'll say, this wage gap has had on all of that. And it affects us all. I think now, if we're looking at the wage gap, Black women aren't expected to reach parity, gender pay parity, until 21, 23, I believe. And that's a number that we kind of just need to take in there. And these numbers also, what this represents, when we see them broken down, let's talk about it a little in form of, on average, we're losing about $2,000 a month. And that means about $24,000 a year. So we think about what that kind of money means to a family when women are often the head of households. That's like, I can't even imagine when I think about how my mom has worked since she was 15 and she just hit retirement age in the last few years, what kind of difference that would have made in my life. So those are the kind of numbers that we're looking at now. And it doesn't, and why does this affect us all? Because we can't look at the wages of just, you know, Black women going down or Latina women going down. At some point, this affects us all. This affects us all. It also, you know, this wage gap will follow women as well. It follows us throughout our lifetime. It makes a difference with what we take in for Social Security. It makes a difference with disability, because those things are often predicated on what we make. So that's how it follows us throughout our lifetime. And historically speaking, women of color have been steered toward care-related jobs. And those are the jobs in low-paying categories. So that, you know, we have to think of how that just carries us through.
Nichelle, my career was as a staff nurse, and then I went back and got degrees and ended up being a professor, but just being a nurse. And then the years my children were little, I worked part-time the whole time. So like when it's time for Social Security, when they list all your income, you're going to like, oh, these were my child rearing ages, you know, and you know, it is hard to work and, you know, full-time and bring in salary and that while we're doing child rearing. The other concept that I had read about as well, Nichelle, maybe you can expand on this a little bit, was that currently, and you're in business, if they look at my salary history and I put in what I was making, I found it interesting that if I was in a position of poor pay before, it just repeats itself. So if I said, well, my salary was 30,000, but everybody else at the new place is making 40, 45, and they'll like, oh, we can give her 30 because she was only making 30, that almost perpetuates that.
It does. It's one of those things when I said it follows us, you're exactly right. And that's one of those things, if we're in position as women, if we're in position in businesses, that's something that we should not allow to be done, because that's another way that we're being held back. Yes, we should not allow employees coming in for their pay to be considered, predicated on what they made in the past. That is definitely a way to hold us back. That's one of those ways that it just follows us, because you're never able to catch up. If it's going to continue to be based on what I made before, how can we catch up? And that's all women. This gender, the pay gap, it doesn't discriminate in a sense, right? It is prevalent at every in every state. It is prevalent at every educational level. So they tell us go to school, which we should go to school, but no matter how much education you get, what occupation you go in, you still have to worry about that pay gap. So you're not gonna education yourself out of it. We do have women that reach those high levels, and we definitely need that. But for the majority of us, we're still gonna stay in that cycle.
And that leads us, Representative Dillard, can you share with us a little bit about Equal Pay Act and some kind of system legislative type actions that might be taken to address this?
Sure, Nichelle, and I'm glad to be here with you and Nichelle and all the League of Women Voters and friends who have chimed in tonight. I have been certainly supportive of Equal Pay Act, and in South Carolina, one of my colleagues, Representative Wendy Brawley, since 2018 has introduced the act to establish pay equity in South Carolina. Because as Nichelle said, there are ways and barriers that allow for employers to continue to perpetuate paying women unequal to men. And so, you would think that we would not need a law in 2022, but we do. And so since 2018, this bill has been introduced. And even this General Assembly session of 2019, it started in 2019, we just ended our session. The bill was pre-filed, and it has been pre-filed. Now, what's the significance of that? When we pre-file a bill in December, it's supposed to be guaranteed a hearing. None of these bills since 2018 have received a legislative hearing. And quite frankly, it is up to the chairman of the committee to grant bills a hearing, but that is a sad commentary for where South Carolina wants its women to be and how it values equity in pay. And so what would the bill have done if we could have been so fortunate to get it across the bow here? So it was House Bill 3183. And the bill would have enshrined into state law, fair pay. And not just for women, but really for all South Carolina workers. It would have promoted accountability. We want to hold people accountable by having employers to have job-related reasons for consistent with business necessity if you're going to have unjust pay. So you just can't have unjust pay. You need a reason why that there's going to be a pay difference on the job. It would protect against retaliation when workers challenge illegal pay practices. So if I'm going in the office and I'm going, I really don't think that's right because Bob's pay is not that, then it would protect me or any other woman from being retaliated upon because you question the pay inequity. And so it would also limit how employers use prior salary, we just talked about that, to determine what the current salary should be. So that would no longer be the case. And the bill would clarify discrimination, whether based on sex, race, or another factor. These issues should have no place in the decision-making process, whether it's your sex or gender. And I believe on Nichelle's the chart that we looked at, we had LGBTQ, we had all these different races that have different pay equity. And so that should not be the case, and that would be outlawed by the bill. Also, it would allow for some oversight. So right now there is no one checking, it's just whatever a company wants to pay. That's what the pay scale is. So it would have created a mechanism by which labor licensing and regulation, we call that LLR department, to monitor businesses, and if they were in violation, to allow for some penalties, and in some cases back pay if found to be guilty of pay inequity. And so all of this, we know we're talking about Black Women's Equal Pay Day being tomorrow. We know that Black women have historically been the breadwinners in their families and have been in the workforce a very long time. My grandmother, I can recall one of them, she was a domestic worker. And so, and I looked at her ability to pay for health care and to take care of a family of 7, big family. She did it, but Lord, I don't know how in the world she was able to accomplish that. And so we have, so it's unfortunate that we have not been able to get any traction on this bill or on these bills through the lifetime of 2018 that I could track where the bill was actually introduced. We have had some male supporters of the bill because they realize the need, because, really pay equity is a family issue. It's really not, a woman's issue. I mean, it's women who are being discriminated upon, but even in a 2-household situation, less money coming into the house is less money. And so I think that we should be looking at this in a broader context, and maybe that's how we're going to gain some momentum on this issue.
That's a great perspective. And Sharday, my colleague as well. So it is a family issue. We all know that, right? How much money is coming into the household and where it's all going, things like that. Now, Representative Dillard, you were talking about a state, but there's also a pay equity, right? A law nationally that I believe passed the Congress, but not the Senate a couple of years ago. And that's just kind of languishing as well.
That is correct. I did see, and I could find comments and quotes from the speaker, who we know is Nancy Pelosi. The House, the Congress did pass a pay equity bill, but it has languished again in Congress, in the Senate. And so there is work for us to do as voters, as women, as moms, as sisters, aunts, and bringing, again, our male colleagues with us in this space and advocating for this issue.
And today is voter registration day. I know that everybody here is like preaching to the choir, but my son has 2 friends that recently moved to Greenville, and I saw that I sent them voter registration material, and I said, have you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote in South Carolina? And neither of them were. So find those places where you can to get people to vote and vote for know what they're voting for.
Nichelle, can I add just a
absolutely
something that Representative Dillard said? One of the things that I find that we don't do, as women, is talk about our salary. It's just a taboo thing. So that's something that we need to start opening up and being more transparent about in our circles, and looking at it as helping each other that way, talking about, salary histories and, what we're making, maybe, I know it's a difficult conversation, but it's some conversations that need to be had among us too,
I would agree with that. I just saw a comment that asked if some of the legislative opposition was coming for the business community. And I would say yes to that. It was so eye-opening to me. I was at an event, and one of our big manufacturers in the state of South Carolina was openly talking about how they set salary. They call up another big manufacturer and said, hey, what is your starting salary? I said, what? They didn't even realize what they were sharing, in the conversation. I was like, what? That's why we need equal pay, because one job does not translate to another job. Now, we just talked about that. And so it's rather a very casual way of trying to set salaries across the state, particularly among some like companies. But I also found myself today in a hospitality meeting where the folks who have hotels and restaurants said that their number one concern is wages. Well, duh. That's what people are talking about. We just came through a pandemic. Wages in the industry were low to begin with, but that was their number one concern: workforce and wages. Mm-hmm. Well, what if we had equal pay? Mm-hmm. Maybe that would go away. I don't know, or at least raising the minimum wage.
I was just going to say, the minimum wage, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so
yeah,
and pay transparency, exactly. Yeah.
So I think I want to talk a little bit. I know we're not historians sitting here, but a little bit when I was reading about this topic is the inequity is based on a history of injustice, which really stems from slavery, segregation. We did book club on redlining and the different properties, and even unequal access to government programs. It wasn't really only until a couple of years ago that I realized that the GIs, the African-American GIs in World War II, didn't get the same GI benefits. And so, it's a history of that. Would you guys like to talk a little bit more about that?
Definitely. Women as a whole, we know that we've been steered to care-related work, right? So women as a whole, that's where we've been steered historically. That's where they said we would perform best. And then women of color, even more so steered to those kinds of jobs, the care-related jobs, which, bears witness to, low paying jobs. So that's where we have historically been steered. I can think of, even as I was growing up, I'll say how many women that I knew, Black women like myself, that were steered toward, I think it's, you correct me, Michelle, I know you're in the healthcare field, but like an LPN.
LPN.
Yeah, that was, everyone wanted to do that, or everyone wanted to, or either we were steered toward, cashier counter, any kind of care related work. We've typically been steered in that way. And not only are we steered in that direction, that type of work is not valued.
Right.
To be, frank, we pay people more to watch our cars than we do our children, so that our work has never been valued. So it definitely is steeped in history.
And I can only add to that agreement, there has been what we call vertical segregation in the workforce, where there are fewer women in the senior positions in a lot of companies. So therefore that pay does not translate, the higher the position, sometimes the higher the pay. Also, I would say implicit bias in hiring practices and stereotyping do not add value to pay equity. And so there are just a number of things. And again, you touched on the roles that women have found themselves in as caregivers, as far as child care positions. Right now, we're having a conversation in this state, during COVID, we really went into a child care desert, but now we're not rebounding the way we should, but a lot of the employees in that industry are women. Women who are in the child care industry So, we have to take all of that into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And typically when women enter a field, the pay rate goes down. If you watch that and do some research on that, typically when women enter a certain field and start to, gain strides in that,
Interesting.
the rate of pay will start to trend downward.
We talked a little bit. To me, it's apparent the economic benefits to equal pay for women, families, society, and then even generational wealth, right? Owning property, that type of thing. So to me, I don't know if anybody wants to say anything more about the economic benefits to pay equity. To me, they're kind of obvious. Maybe we can kind of summarize and kind of close away as that we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe kind of to articulate. First of all, maybe let me go back. The American Association of University Women has got a plethora of resources. Maybe we can show some resources for everybody and then take some of those, because those are good for additional reading. But then we can kind of talk a little bit about takeaways. What can we do as individuals? What should businesses be doing? And we can kind of close this evening with that. And then we'll also open it up to Q&A. I have not looked at the chat room, but I know Laura's probably monitoring that. So again, we'll kind of talk about the resources and then what can each of us, what some action plans that each of us can kind of implement individually or in our job sites. So in preparation for this, I had looked at those and I was very impressed with the work that's been done there. So I highly encourage you to check that out. Very well done, lots of research, lots of other resources based on that. I did take a summary. I am going to read this a little bit that said, the reason that we have pay equity is that, this is kind of a summarizing, work done by women is undervalued. Women get low paying jobs. Mothers face discrimination. Caregiving expectations suppress female earnings. And then systemic racism. So that's kind of, those were some bullets that AAUW talked about. And I think we kind of covered those as well tonight. So either Nichelle or Chandra, do you want to maybe leave with a couple things that we should all do? We've touched on a couple, but keep us active.
I think what we're doing now, meeting like this, change often it starts on a small scale. So continuing to do small things like this, be active in groups in your community, like AAUW, like the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network, those groups that are on the ground, that are going to, the State House. We actually have to be active in those organizations. We have to know what's going on and we have to support them.
And Laura, what other, I know we have women in leadership. I don't want to forget anybody. We've announced numerous groups today, or we're invited to this.
Women in leadership, the AAUW, REN, of which Nichelle is on the board. I think that's, and other leagues.
And we have taped this tonight. So the link will be on our chapter's website, or you can email one of us. We'll get that to you, and then you can share that with friends and foes.
I know we're not quite to the Q&A part yet, but somebody dropped a question or a point that maybe Chandra and or Nichelle could talk about. B. Howard says, state agencies in South Carolina should review their policies regarding pay equity. Mm-hmm. Is that something, Chandra, that is happening, isn't happening, could be a step forward?
No, I saw that, and I would say to that, yes, we should. And usually those things are directed by the legislature. And I can absolutely share with you that we just recently, the legislature commissioned a salary study. Now that's a little different, but at least we trying to get competitive pay, in like industries, as we look at other states and what they're doing. So we have commissioned a salary study, and there have been some increases in pay. Unfortunately, though, yes, they have been in some organizations, but y'all, believe it or not, we had to increase the pay of our lieutenant governor and some of our constitutional officers. And see, that's little things that you don't hear about, and that is, it might sound self-serving, but we were way off balance, even for those jobs. But you would think that would pique more consciousness about what is happening across the board. And of course, we have increased the starting salary for teachers in South Carolina in some critical areas, but that still does not meet the standard of conversation that we're having today. You might have a pay band, but are you getting the same thing? And I think we've got to be transparent about pay bands. And whether you're in a government entity or you are outside, we've got to post those things. We've got to post the absolute the pay. I'm trying to look over here and read and talk to y'all at the same time. Obviously, I'm not multitasking well. But where I also wanted to go about what else can we do? Certainly, we need to have these conversations because some women aren't even aware that there's a disparity. Until we started honestly having this conversation. And again, I didn't really start having the conversation until 2018. I was like, yeah, okay. And then started reflecting on my personal life and jobs and decisions. The other thing that we can do is we can teach women how to negotiate when they go in to those private settings with their employer. I think there's some people who do that well. And maybe that should be our next Zoom. How do you negotiate a salary? But just plain on the ground, grassroots efforts never cease as well. And I'm going to encourage that. Y'all, we have got to vote. And we need to be writing editorials in the paper. Let's put this on blast. Again, it's not a secret. We know that it's happening. Now we've been informed. And we need to rally, just like we're rallying for women's healthcare rights. This is an issue to me worth putting on the front page.
And we need to hold businesses accountable too. We really do. I mean, for those of us who are in positions in organizations, things like pay audits, like those are things that you can suggest if you are in those types of positions within your organization. And when you go in for interviewing, ask about things like that. Do you routinely do pay audits? Is there pay transparency? What type of transparency is around salaries, within your organization? So definitely negotiating your salary and holding the organizations accountable.
I would like to also say the Equal Rights Amendment still hasn't been ratified. So there is an organization called Vote Equality, and they're working on getting the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, back in the narrative, back in the discussion. That's really died down as well. And I think that may also help this issue as well. But Laura, are you monitoring the chat? Do you want to ask a couple of those questions?
Yeah, sure. There's one that I really kind of interested in hearing the answers to. I'm just going to read it. As a recent college grad heading into the political workforce, which is an extremely white male dominated industry, what would you recommend for me going in as a Black woman, and how can I myself and the next generation of Black women workers advocate for the equal pay of Black women and all women?
Well, I'm going to take a stab at that. I think what we're doing now, change happens most of the time, of course, very slowly. sometimes the quiet nibbles at it, as we keep pushing. And I think Nichelle said some very powerful things about holding your current employer accountable, negotiating for your own salary. Because once you do that, guess what? You can teach somebody else how to do that. And so I think wherever we find ourselves in this space, no matter who you're working for, because we know that employment is a journey. You might find yourself in different situations, different kind of employers. I think we have to take responsibility for our own salary before we can advocate for other people effectively and know what we're doing. And I don't know that answered the question, because that was a really big question, but I just feel like wherever we find ourselves, whatever space we find ourselves in, if we can use the influence that we have and the power of others around us who are like-minded, that's how change occurs.
I think that's a really good point.
Janique, I hope I said your name right. You asked the question. Share your information with your friends, around your age. I sent the information for this panel out to, we have like a family chat, and it's younger women from their teenage years to older women who've been in the workforce. And a lot of the information I share, none of them knew about it. So share your information. They were like, wow, that exists, and that they are unaware. People just sometimes are unaware of some of these facts. So you're here, and I applaud you, and I hope you share everything you learn with your cohort. Anybody that you're hanging out with, you're networking with, share your information with them.
Nichelle, since you deal so much with businesses, do you think the opposition to equal pay, and of course Chandra too would know, comes from the business community, or Chandra from the political? Is it just a political thing?
No, I think absolutely the business community. Anything that has to do with labor rights in this state, it's always an uphill battle. But when industry speaks, industry is a big stakeholder in South Carolina politics, and so if the business industry climate, in the climate that we create here, or if they are not opening up their arms to increase pay, then the legislature is not interested in that wholesale, and that's why it has to be a balance. But what is happening is there is being a course correction, just like I shared with you. Those hoteliers and restaurant folks, they admitted they are having to increase pay. So whether they want to do it or not, in some industries they have to, in order to retain good employees. And I'm sure my legislative colleagues would like it to happen organically like that. But you still have the folks who are the big three or the big four that I told you about, who pick up the phone and just call each other, hey, what are you paying over there? So we've got a mixed bag. In some instances, it's changing on its own. I think COVID has shown a light on pay, if nothing else, and health disparities. There's some things that came out of COVID that we were not even talking about. Some of us knew it because we live it and we see it. But I think that was one of the things about pay and what we pay folks, and how do you, what kind of quality of life people have based on economic stability.
It changes the game. I'm going to feel better about going to work if I'm paid for the work that I'm doing. I'm going to perform better. I'm going to feel better. If my family's taken care of. It's really a shame that we had to get to the point of a pandemic for businesses to say, oh, I guess we have to raise our wages. That really is a shame that we had to get to that point, but that's where we are.
I'm just wondering if, and this is totally anecdotal, but I just wonder if, if you made equal pay with your male counterparts, it's going to advantage your family. It's going to enable better healthcare. It's going to improve educational opportunities. You can send your kids to better schools, or be sure you can send them to college, put money away for college. All of those kinds of things are going to improve and elevate a community, which puts more money and benefit into the economy, which grows the business climate. It's kind of, to me, it seems like there's an opportunity. It's an investment in building stronger communities, not a cost center.
That's right. It would actually cut the poverty rate in half if women reached pay parity, is what it would do. And I always say, when women thrive, of course, families thrive, communities thrive, businesses thrive. I mean, as women, we are often the change makers in the communities anyway. So imagine what our communities would be like if we had this money that was missing. Imagine the changes that we would, put into our community, the positive changes, because we are often the change makers in the community. We put more money and more effort into changing our communities for the positive.
And I would simply add that our children would thrive.
Oh my God.
I had looked back again in some of my notes that I had found at one point, just a little over 70% of Black women are single head of household in this state. So just imagine what would happen if they didn't have to work two jobs, because that's what my mom did as a single head of household.
Yeah.
While I was in college, she worked two jobs to make sure,
all her life.
to get through, make ends meet. So I was fortunate enough to have a village around me with grandparents and things, but I think about the women who don't have a village, whose children might be left at home, or whose children go without. And so that impacts the educational outcome sometimes. So our children would also thrive as well.
With tomorrow being Black Women's Equal Pay Day, what kind of actions for the people on this call or their associates or friends or family, what kind of specific actions would either of you guys recommend be done? What can we do? Just to rally the flag, I guess.
Well, I think something very simple is take to social media, your Facebook page or your Instagram or Twitter, whatever your social media of choice is. Let somebody know what you learned tonight. Announce that tomorrow is Black Women's Equal Pay Day. I mean, you were given some figures. I don't know how you want to articulate it, but share with your friends, and let's light social media up. That's one of the simplest things to do. And if you're so bold, call your legislator and say, next year when you go back to session, I want an Equal Pay Act passed in South Carolina. Or I will see you at the ballot box.
I also, like one of you suggested, writing an editorial. We have a bunch of intelligent women on this. I don't know, maybe there's men. I don't want to discriminate, but I bet somebody on this call can write a letter tomorrow that they're a good writer. They can put one in the mail. So yes. I'll challenge somebody to do that.
Good point.
Any other questions? Last minute. So we're wrapping up. I really want to thank Nichelle and Chandra for sharing your time and expertise, and we all have work to do, and go everyone.